Hey horror fans, Dan here, and I just saw Jordan Peele's Us. I think it's a really impressive film that I liked a lot, but I had a lot of issues with it. Before I dive into those things though, here's your warning as I'm about to spoil the shit out of it. Okay, so first I just want to throw out some positivity, because I know, this is a really solid movie and I don't just want to shit all over it. It was a really great experience watching it in the theater, really, edge of your seat, great action, great connecting to the characters. It was scary, it was thought-provoking, there's a lot of great symbolism in the movie, and I definitely recommend the movie. I just think that there are some issues with it once you get into interpreting the movie into more detail. But to understand my critique of the film, I have to get two quick filmy definitions out of the way. I'm going to discuss the film on a manifest level and a latent level. Now, manifest level basically means the plot, what actually happens inside the world of the film, whereas latent level is more the metaphor, the symbolism, the subtext, if you will, of the film. Each moment, or quote-unquote beat, of the film has a manifest level and a latent level. A great allegorical story is able to make each beat work within both the manifest and latent logic that the story has set up. I'm not sure that Us totally succeeds here. It's an allegory, but I don't know that each thing that we see happen in the movie makes sense in terms of the greater message. And since so much of it is symbolic and so much of it does feed into the message, it makes things that don't sort of stick out in a weird way. Now, I do want to say, my criticisms here are based on my own interpretation of the film and interpretations I've seen other people have. So if I'm missing any important allegory here, any important message, let me know. It's a complex movie, I'm not assuming I completely understand it. So all that said, let's get into what my actual interpretation of the film is. The way I see it, the Tethered represent the poorest Americans. They are the lowest class, and this is represented in the film by them literally living below our main characters, who we consider middle to upper class. The poor are mistreated and discarded, much like the Tethered. The upper and middle class see them as other and forget that they are us too. They are just as much human and American as the upper classes. Those below, the tethered/lower class, try to emulate those above, as we see by watching the tethered sort of have to act out what's happening above. The problem is that they can't ever catch up and actually fully emulate those above because they don't have access to some of the same luxuries or privileges that those above do. Red, Adelaide's tethered, references this when they first meet in the house. She talks about how the tethered don't have access to the same kinds of food, toys, or medical care. Again, this is connecting back to the lower classes not having the same privileges and connections that the upper classes do. The government was only interested in the tethered, aka the lower class, so when they thought that they could use them to get power, much like they often do in election cycles, but eventually they abandoned them once they realized that they have no more use for them. I think the movie is saying if the poor ever organized behind a charismatic leader, like Red in the film, they'd have more power than any other class. Red was inspired by Hands Across America, which was a symbol of coming together for the poor. So when the tethered end up at the end of the movie, having hands across America themselves, their demonstration represents the poor standing up for themselves. They don't need the upper class doing it as a charity thing. They're standing up and uniting in their own power. So that's the broader strokes, right? But as for the specific story of Adelaide, let's talk about how the twist works on a latent level. So we find out at the end of the movie that the Adelaide that we've been following is actually a tethered, and that she switched places with the real Adelaide when they were kids. The message here is that Adelaide had to fight her way up from the bottom to find her charmed life, much like many climbing the social ladder. Her fear of being found out as an imposter represents the imposter syndrome that many social climbers feel. Ultimately, she forgot where she came from and those she had to push down to get there. So I'd say, in a nutshell, the overall message of this film is to be grateful for what you have instead of spending all of your time going after the next expensive thing like Gabe did. Always remember that there are those less fortunate living in lower financial classes. Now, obviously, this is a boiling down of a very complex film with lots of different symbolism going on. I do think that there are some other messages, some other metaphors that, to me, is part of my issue with the film. I feel like they're sort of mixing metaphors in a way that doesn't totally work. For instance, if the interpretation I just gave is true, which is really about class warfare, why do we have to have the tethered be doppelgangers at all? Why aren't they just like mole people? That whole metaphor works totally fine of just mole people, and in fact the fact that they are exact copies sort of muddles the water, right? Could be signifying that my interpretation isn't complete, but to me, it signifies that there's just a little bit too much going on. There's a side metaphor about facing your own demons or the darkness inside all of us. You're your own worst enemy, unless you're saying like, oh, you're our own worst enemies because you're not accepting what you have and not being happy for what you have. It just feels like a little bit too tangential to me. Beyond that, the film is riddled with plot holes. Where did they get the robes and scissors from? Why wouldn't Red just leave the tunnels once she regained control of her body? Why would the government just abandon all of these clones? Wouldn't they want to kill them to cover up their experiment? And beyond the metaphor that the poor don't have a voice, why on a manifest level can't the Tethered speak if they're just clones? Doesn't make any sense to me. But at the end of the day, the biggest issue is that the movie basically tells you its message subtextually via Red's monologuing, rather than showing you the message through the actual manifest plot and actions of the characters. The manifest and latent levels don't sync up. For instance, let's talk about this xenophobic narrative they're trying to build up in the latent level. That message doesn't really carry through on a manifest level because the world of the movie, the them, are trying to kill the us. Of course they're gonna fear them, they don't mistreat them, they didn't even know that they existed. To sort of explain what I mean, let's talk about this in terms of like a very popular, obvious metaphor that we see in science fiction a lot, right? Which is the invasion of Earth by aliens. So on a manifest level, people are afraid because there's actual aliens here that are coming and they're, you know, different looking and you don't understand them. And on a latent level, that can often have to do with xenophobia, with racism. But if the message is supposed to be xenophobia is bad, usually what you would do is make the aliens misunderstood, right? There would be an idea of just because they're different doesn't mean they're bad. But the thing is that in this movie, the different are bad. The Tethered are just all coming out to kill people that honestly never really did anything to them. The government did things to them, but our family is innocent. And the white family that gets killed, yes, they, you know, on a larger latent level, they committed the sin of like capitalism and greed and not being grateful for what they had, but they didn't do anything directly to the Tethered. And so therefore, it creates this weird message where you should be afraid of the Tethered. The movie really kind of reads more like look out for those below you because they're jealous and they will kill you for what you have, even if you didn't do anything to them. In some ways, that's reinforced by the fact that our heroes, the family, don't get killed. They survive, they're victorious. And it does create this weird feeling of, I know what the message is supposed to be. I obviously know that Jordan Peele isn't saying like, oh, look out for the jealous people who are gonna come kill you for your money. But when you look at actually what the movie is saying and you try to think about like death of the author, it creates this weird idea. That's sort of the crux of what my issue with the movie is, and I think this is a really complicated movie that I'm gonna think about a lot more and probably disagree with some of the things I've said so far, but I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments below. Please let me know your interpretations, where you disagree with me, where you agree with me, and anything I might have missed. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you're doing okay.